Hi, I'm Viv at So Inspired and welcome to Maker's Monday. Today I want to talk to you about one of my very favorite Creative Grids trim tools, and it's the Ultimate Flying Geese trim tool. The reason I'm sharing this with you today is because we used this tool when we made our 2020 Quilter's Trek blue block called Blue Goose on the Loose. Our kit is available in store, and for the first time this year, kits are available online. Look for a 2020 participating shop for Quilter's Trek, and you can stop in and pick up a free pattern. Here's our standalone pattern, or you can pick up a kit. We've packaged up the blue batiks and the purple sashing and background fabric that we used in our block, and you have a couple of things that you can do this year. You can make a large block by putting 4 of them together. Here's one. Or you can make a row like you've done in previous years, or you can take these 9-inch finished blocks and spread them out as fillers in the quilt that you design. To purchase our kit, you can go to soinspiredquilts.com. Go to Shop Online, and the category is Quilter's Trek. On that page, you'll see the kit, which ships for $2.75 first class, and you will also see the Creative Grids Ultimate Flying Geese trim tool. So if you don't already own one, you can add that to your cart as well. Keep in mind that we are still doing curbside or in-store pickup, so you can select one of those options in addition to having it shipped if you are not in Connecticut or not planning on traveling for Quilter's Trek this year. So let's talk a little bit about this trim tool. There are multiple methods for making flying geese, and there are a myriad of resources out there, but the best resource by far is the Creative Grids website. So if you go to www.creativegridsusa.com, you can find all of the instructions for the various tools, and you can find companion patterns too. My favorite resource is the Facebook page that Deb Heatherly, who designed this and several others of the Creative Grids trim tools, she has a Facebook group called Grids Girls. It's not a public group. You just simply need to ask to join it, and you'll be welcomed among thousands of participants in this Facebook group who share their ideas and also participate in the quilt-alongs and mystery quilts that Deb Heatherly posts out there. So go on to the Facebook page, ask to join, and you'll find several files out there. I'm going to show you some of the files today that I downloaded from her website, including measuring charts and tutorials for the various methods of making flying geese. So there are 3 methods where you can make 4 geese at once. And if you look closely at our block, you can see we have 4 dark blue, 4 medium blue, and 4 light blue geese. And you're going to make all of those at once with one of these 3 methods. The first method is called the crosscut method. And here, you're going to take a 5 3/4 inch square and 4 3 1/4 inch squares, and you're simply going to slice them on the diagonal. The large square you'll slice twice on the diagonal, and the smaller squares once. This is by far the simplest method of making flying geese. Keep in mind that you are sewing on bias edges, so you're going to want to be careful. Perhaps spray with a little bit of best press first before you start piecing. Simply position those smaller triangles along the edge and sew, and you'll know that when you press, you're going to end up with those little dog ears, but those are all going to come off later on, and the dog ears here as well, when you trim with the Flying Geese trim tool. That's method number 1. Method number 2 is what we call the heart method. It's a fast way to make 4 at once, and you're going to start with the exact same pieces that you started with for the crosscut method. It's that 5 3/4 inch large square and those 4 3 1/4 inch smaller squares. Except this time, you're not going to cut. You're going to position those 2 smaller squares and draw a line down the center and stitch 1/4 inch to each side. They will overlap slightly in the middle. Don't worry about that. When you cut on that line that you drew, you're going to end up with two pieces, and you'll press the smaller ones towards, you're going to press the seam towards the smaller squares. So this is why it's called the heart method. After you've done that, you'll take each one of those hearts and the last two squares, and you'll position that square and do the exact same thing. Draw a line and stitch 1/4 of an inch to each side. After you've done that, you'll cut it apart, and each of those hearts yields 2 geese. And they'll look like this. We'll trim this one out at the end. I'll show you the markings on the tool. One of my favorite methods is called the 2-square method, and it's not a very well-known method, and you won't find the instructions for that included in the instructions that come with your trim tool. You will find, however, the tutorial and all of the measurements for that on Deb Heatherly's Creative Grids Facebook page. You're going to start with 2 squares. I know this light one here is a little bit tricky to see against the flannel wall because it's a light color. So you'll see that one square is slightly larger than the other. And you're going to position it like this. Again, you're using that same method of drawing a line and stitching 1/4 of an inch to each side of the line and then slicing it apart. The pieces that you end up with look like this. You'll take those and you will rotate one and put them again right sides together. And you'll see there's quite a bit of a gap over here, and that's okay. What you want is for those outside edges to line up. Once again, you'll be marking that line down the center and stitching 1/4 of an inch to each side of it and cutting it apart. What you end up after that is this odd looking piece. You'll have 2 exactly like this, and you can see there's a goose, here's a goose, so you'll have 4 at a time. We'll trim this one out as well. So on the Facebook page that Deb Heatherly has for Grids Girls, she gives you a step-by-step tutorial. So you can see with full color photos every single step in the process to make the flying geese with that heart method. She also has, as I mentioned, the picture tutorial for the 2-square method. So you can see step by step exactly as I just described it. You'll want to print out the chart that she has online that shows all of the cutting sizes for the squares for each of the methods, depending on the finished size of your geese. Keep in mind with all of the Creative Grids tools, you're talking about finished size. So a goose that finishes to 2 by 4 is going to be 2.5 by 4.5 unfinished. Those are the sizes that we're making this afternoon. So let's talk a little bit about trimming. There are 2 trims. There's trim number 1, and it's noted at the top of the ruler, and you'll see that you're going to line up right in the point of the geese, and then there's trim number 2 when you rotate the ruler, and there's your second cut. I'm going to take this flying goose, and I'm going to lay the ruler on and show you where this will be trimmed with trim number 1. As I mentioned, my goose is going to finish to 2 by 4. So this is D, and the line is right there in my seam and right in that point. And I'm going to make my first cut. And when I make my cut, the Creative Grids ruler is not going to slip because it has that famous Creative Grids non-slip surface on the back of it, including all the way around the 1/4 inch edge of the ruler where the seam allowance is. So I'm going to make one cut up the right-hand side and another cut across the top, and I'll show you what that looks like. We didn't trim too much, just a little bit. So let's rotate the block and rotate the ruler and make that second cut. So you can see now my goose is pointing down. I've rotated to the second side of the ruler where it says trim number 2, and I have just a little bit to cut off there as well. Once again, I'm going to cut up the right and across the top. Now, for purposes of this demonstration, I'm just cutting down here on the table and flipping it up to show you. But if you have one of these rotating mats, this is a great way to trim up blocks up to 12.5 inches square. Because you don't have to rotate, you can simply spin. So here you can see I've made that second trim, and I have a perfect goose. You'll want to be sure that you have that 1/4 inch seam allowance up at the top, and that your point comes right down into the corner. And with this trim tool, that's perfectly achievable. When you are sewing your goose units together, let me share with you a little tip. If you're sewing the long edges here, what's helpful is that this is the side that's facing up as you're feeding it into your machine. And the reason for that is because you can see that intersection over here, and that's where you want your needle to go, so that when you open that up and press it, you have a perfect point. Some people prefer to press their seams open, and that's fine. But I recommend that when you're sewing, if at all possible, that you're able to eyeball that intersection so that you know exactly where your needle needs to go. If you have to fudge it a little bit to achieve that perfect point, it's so much easier to do when you can see that. So let's talk a little bit about some companion products. We're fans of Deb Heatherly's as well as Creative Grids here at Sew Inspired, and we've done a number of her projects. The quilt that you see behind me is all about the grids, and this was one that we did as a quilt along in our Grids Girl Club several years ago. It's 47 inches square, and you have the opportunity to use several different trim tools, including the Strippy Stars, the Flying Geese, and the Log Cabin, as well as the Cat's Cradle. Corey made this sample for us, and we love the colors that she chose. I love a Flying Geese border. So if you are looking for something to incorporate into your Quilter's Trek Experience quilt this year, you might want to consider using the Flying Geese in a border. We also have the Curiosity quilt. This pattern is done as somewhat of a row by row, and also has 2 rows of Flying Geese going in each direction. And Sue made this sample up for us in some Banyan batiks, and we have that on display and the pattern available as well. It also uses several of the trim tools. We have a number of cut loose press patterns here at Sew Inspired, and the one that uses this trim tool that we have, and one of my favorites, is called Wild and Free, and it's simply Flying Geese. It's a table runner, so it's a great way to get some practice because you can use each of the methods and determine which one you prefer. And of course, for many of her tools, Deb Heatherly has published standalone books, and this one here has 13 patterns that use the Creative Grids trim tool. And you can use several different sizes. So you'll see all of the different sizes that the trim tool allows you to achieve here. And the patterns in this book can be sized up or sized down accordingly. So I hope you've had some inspiration and you have some ideas. Start thinking about your Quilter's Trek Experience quilt. The theme this year is blue. Our row again is blue goose on the loose. You don't have to have the Creative Grids Ultimate Trim Tool Ruler, the Flying Geese ruler, but if you have it, now's a great time to use it. If you'd like to see an in-store demo, we have these parts available for you to take a closer look at. Simply ask to see them, and we hope to see you in store soon. Thanks, and have a great week.